Everybody, you're very welcome to this Zoom from We Are Church International. We are celebrating 30 years of We Are Church since we were founded. And we were delighted when Pope Francis introduced the synodal process in 2021. And our members have been actively taking part in that process for the last 4 years. So now it's come to crunch time, because you can have all the debating, all the discussion, all the synodality you want, but change needs to come through as well. And today, this evening, we have 3 excellent speakers lined up who will be looking at what are the options for real synodality happening, because now is the time that decision has to be made. We have 3 speakers, as I've said. After they have finished speaking, we will have a question and answer session. So you will all have a chance, if you want to put questions, either by raising your hand or by using the chat function. So now, without further ado, just to formally, really properly start our meeting, I call on Gemma Lamara, please, to lead us in an opening prayer. Gemma.
God of the universe, we give you thanks for all that we share, for the faith and the community that sustains us. God of our lives, you are challenging us to follow you into the future, inviting us to new ventures, new challenges, new ways to care, new ways to touch the hearts of all. Women and men together, we join together in fellowship and hope, with open minds, eager to listen and learn together. When we are fearful of the unknown, give us courage. When we worry that we are not up to the task, remind us that you would not call us if you did not believe in us. When we get tired or disappointed with the way things are going, remind us that you can bring change and hope out of the most difficult situations. Amen.
Amen. And now I'll ask Valerie, please, to introduce our first speaker. Valerie.
It's a privilege and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Avril Baigent. Avril first attracted my attention in 2021, when many of us were starting to lose hope as the COVID pandemic raged. Avril had a completely different and optimistic outlook. She looked to the Church of the future and offered 6 online sessions to encourage us to plan for rebuilding our parishes. It marked a sea change in attitude. Avril has devoted her life to the service of the people of God, especially in youth and adult pastoral ministry, especially in the Diocese of Northampton, England. She is currently the Director of Pastoral Development there. She has combined this with extensive academic study and research. Earlier this year, and we heard with great joy, she was awarded a doctorate by Durham University. She is the co-director of the School for Synodality, which is now spreading internationally. And she was also invited to facilitate a table at the 2024 session of the Synod on Communion, Participation and Mission. Many of us have been enthused and enriched by her accounts of her experience there. Welcome, Avril. We look forward to learning from your insights and wisdom.
What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Valerie. And I was thinking, when was the first time I encountered you on it? Was those rather optimistically named post-lockdown church. And I think by the time we got to number 5, we were back in lockdown again, weren't we? But we were, as you say, we were looking to the future. We were seizing the opportunity. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening. And it's really wonderful to be asked to talk about decision making, decision taking in a synodal church, because it's one of those topics which I think is of it's a kind of touch point for synodality. Synodality is in so many ways, it's this kind of joyful, hopeful vision of church, but it's quite hard to say what it looks like on a wet Wednesday afternoon in a parish. And I think the whole notion of decision making, decision taking is a place where we can see concrete steps that we can take forward. So hopefully this evening, I just want to share chunks of the final document with you, so that we can actually see what is the vision for that came out of the Synod Assembly. And I'm sure that many of you know that that document was written over two sessions in Rome by 350 people coming together to spend a month at a time in Rome. So it's a really global document, and it's a document which I find huge treasure and richness in, even though sometimes it's a bit frustratingly technical at the same time. So that will be my focus this evening, is to look through the part 3 of the final document, and just to pull out some of the key elements and the key thinking around this really important topic. And what I've just put on the screen there is a QR code, which will, and our comms person for School for Synodality is going to go mad, because that doesn't take you to the School for Synodality website. It takes you to the final document. And one thing I would say is that there have been some fantastic synthesis and summaries around, but there is nothing that beats actually reading the document yourself. And I see this is a hugely international gathering, and you can get it in every language. There are so many languages that it's been translated into now, so no reason why not to read it in your own language. So just want to share that as a first encouragement, as a kind of almost a respect of the church back to this synod process, and to say that was the 3 years of listening, and this is what came out of it. Anyway, what does it have to say about our topic this evening? And what I really want to ground everything I'm about to say in is this first opening statement that we find in the first paragraph in section 3. And often I think, and often this is the reality, decision making in the church what is it? It's about power. It's about sides taking, somebody winning, somebody losing, getting a group together, or decisions being made in back rooms and a lack of clarity, or decisions being made by one poor fella on his own who's just, got his back up against the wall and is having been forced into one decision or another. And it's all just so unedifying. I think a lot of our decision making has been unedifying. And I think that the other temptation around the kind of secretive or backroom decision making, or decision making at speed because somebody's just so busy, they haven't got time to consult about this, let's just get it done, let's just get it over. The other issue then is that we become kind of very bureaucratic. And I know, I imagine that lots of you will have had the experience of having people say to them, or perhaps even thinking yourself, oh my goodness, synodality, are we ever going to stop talking and get on with things? So there are these two temptations. There are the temptations never to make a decision because we're just talking and talking and talking. And then there's this temptation to kind of crack on. But that's also not great decision making. What does the document have to say to us? And just a reminder that at the end of the process, of this month-long process of being in Rome, and oh my gosh, that last week it felt like we were crawling through toffee, and we were never going to get anywhere with this final document. Gets right to the very end, and what does the Pope do? He says, I don't need to write an apostolic exhortation. I don't need to write anything. The people of God have spoken. This document is in the ordinary magisterium of the church. So there's something really wonderful about the fact that this is both the voice of the people of God and the ordinary magisterium of the church as we're going through. It has a gravitas to my mind, that it has both of those elements to it. So what does it say here? It says ecclesial discernment, The care for decision-making processes, the commitment to accountability, and the evaluation of our decisions are practices through which we respond to the word that shows us the paths of mission. So all of these things, I'm sure that not one single person on this call tonight would say that we should be less accountable as a church, or that we should be evaluating what we do any less. But what is the purpose behind that? The purpose about it is not to be a better running organisation, which it actually would make us. It isn't that people feel better about some of the difficult decisions we've got to make. No, it is about responding to the word that shows us the paths of mission. If we are not taking decisions in the right way, if we are not taking decisions inspired by the Holy Spirit, bringing in the wide range of voices, if we don't have a care for these processes, we damage our mission. And I think that for me is the most kind of damning statement around this. You know, we damage our mission, we damage trust in ourselves, and we damage our own capacity to be able to speak to the world. So it is such an important, and what is at the beginning of this, each of these sections have a heading, and this one is called the conversion of processes. It isn't called the transformation or the improvement or the getting better at. It's called the conversion, because actually at the heart of it is this conversion, that these processes are not about a bureaucracy. They're about this deep encounter that we are driven to by the Holy Spirit. And so in this paragraph 82, there's just a great summary about what ecclesial discernment, ecclesial of the church, and discernment is trying to feel the Holy Spirit moving in our communities. Where should we be going next? And it says it's not an organizational technique, but rather a spiritual practice grounded in a living faith. It calls for interior freedom, humility, prayer. This notion of ecclesial discernment as something quite different. If we are to go into a meeting to say, I know what my agenda is. And if I've been super smart, I phoned around a few people beforehand to make sure that I'm going to get the support that I need in this meeting. This is a totally different. I mean, we just had Philippians 2 last weekend, and the in the gospel, in the second reading, and the exaltation of the cross. You could not be any more near that reading, where Jesus humbles himself to become one with us. Then this notion of ecclesial discernment. It is absolutely about self-emptying. And so it's not about setting out your own personal opinion or a group point of view or a summing up of different opinions. It is about stepping into that process with trust and humility, and being able to share according to your conscience. Now, I know that every single person on this call will have had an experience likely where this has been abused, all right, where we've gone into a meeting with good faith and this has not happened. That is not to say that this is bust, all right, that we are kind of moving into this new way of being. So this is the underpinning of all of our understanding of decision making. And is this self-emptying, this kenotic way of being community, recognizing together what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And we cannot respond. The world is changing so fast that, for example, if we don't have young people in the room, we don't even understand their perspective on religion is so different to our own perspective on religion. They would see a nun in a habit in almost quite a different way to some of the rest of us in our communities. They would see something around the Latin, something around tradition of the church, sometimes in quite a different way. Now, if we don't have those voices, we are not going to be able to appeal to that generation. And so we've got to have this breadth and this willingness to say, well, blimey, that's not my kind of a church. But I hear what you're saying, and I can see why that is something which is giving you hope. And I love this, the more everyone's heard, the richer the discernment. And it's essential we promote the broadest participation possible in the discernment process, especially those who are at the margins of the Christian community and society. And one of the most wonderful things is that we have this Pope who is just standing up against the world he is calling out an awful lot of the kind of practices and things that are happening at the moment. That's us. He has stood at the margins of society, and that's where we're called to be. And so there's something just very exciting, but so countercultural. This is not the normal way that we would go into a church meeting. And it actually requires quite a lot of a kind of a call to holiness in ourselves and in all of us, really, a spiritual preparation to be able to do this well. Now, I love this document because it's very helpful, and it draws on the wisdom of a lot of the people in the room who've been at this a long time. And I've tried to get, before this document was written, an understanding of communal discernment. And it's always a bit vague, it's a bit slippery, you can't get your hands around it. This for me is a fantastic checklist of how to do this. And it begins with clearly setting out the object of discernment and disseminating information and the means for adequately understanding it. How often in church circumstances do we not even meet that first step? How often do we not even give people the basic information that we need in order to be able to make good decisions about what we're doing? So I won't run through all of this because I'll be doing an hour presentation rather than 15 minutes, and I'm aware of our other speakers, but just that this is just a great passage of how to do this and to do it well, giving sufficient time for prayer, cultivating an inner disposition of freedom, listening attentively to each person's voice. This is a kind of a how-to checklist that we can just pick up. Then the document then goes on to talk about transparency, accountability and evaluation. And it says that these are that you can't just make decisions and then say, okay, we're moving on now. It doesn't matter whether that was a good decision. We don't know how good a decision that was. We don't know whether our processes were any good. It says we have got to keep in mind. And really interestingly, being at the Synod Assembly, it became apparent there is no word in Italian that's an equivalent word to the word accountability. And so it makes you aware that sometimes some of this stuff is quite cultural, that we've got understandings in the kind of English speaking world around these notions that don't just quite translate over. And I can't actually remember what the word it was that they ended up using in Italian. But what this document does is to say this is not coming out of management speak. And again, it's not just so that we don't get sued. This is for our mission, and it actually gives you examples in scripture about that the fact that this is necessary. It's absolutely essential to our being church that we have these values and which run all the way through, including for our transparency and accountability. Then goes on to talk about participatory bodies, and it lays out these list of participatory bodies. Now, I've been doing some work on pastoral councils for the last couple of years, and I am fascinated by pastoral councils, particularly in the UK, where we often just don't have them. And they kind of flourished in the 90s and disappeared in the early 2000s. And I think probably because of a lack of purpose. But I will not talk any more about that, otherwise you'll be getting my other talk, which is on pastoral councils. But anyway, what's very important is it says that participatory bodies represent one of the most promising areas in which to act for rapid implementation of the synodal guidelines, bringing about perceptible changes speedily. How is anybody on the back pew of your church going to know that the synod made any difference? I think that parish councils, repurposing our parish councils, repurposing our participatory bodies and our decision making is the best way of saying to everybody, we heard your voice, we heard what you said, because it then continues that work of listening and looping back to the wider community when we have parish councils that work in that way, that are rooted in prayer and purpose for mission. And then at the end of the document, and so I'm just jumping over huge, great swathes of actually quite detailed instructions, how to get on and do some of this stuff, how to make decisions, how to do accountability and transparency, and what are the kind of procedures around making decisions that are all nicely laid out there. It then comes to the end, and it talks also, I should very much say that we are encouraged to look to our ecumenical brothers and sisters and to other religions to say, how do you do this? I was at an ecumenical conference in Durham a couple of years ago, where the organisers had brought together 6 different denominations together with the Catholics. And it became clear that for Catholics in the UK, we were the only denomination where the lay voice was nowhere to be seen in our structures. And the kind of all the Anglicans and everybody else was sitting around going, what? How, we thought you were like a normal church. How do you not have any lay representation anywhere? So there's much to be learned. I would say that my Baptist friends in a church where everything is decided through a church meeting would say, if I never go to another church meeting again, it'll be too soon. So, you can also have the kind of perils of absolute decision making by community and by committee. And we probably need to work our way forward. And we also have a church in which we have the authority of the priest and the bishop and the pope, and that's canonically built into our structures. We are in a hierarchical church, and just like any good organisation, like a school or a business or a hospital, somebody has to be in charge. Somebody is paid to take the difficult decisions, and it's important that we kind of remember that that's how we work as well. But right at the end of the document, it talks then about diocesan synods and assemblies as bodies for regular consultation between the bishop and the people of God, a place for listening, prayer and discernment, particularly when it comes to choices pertaining to the life and mission of a local church. And in our Diocese of Northampton, our new Diocesan Pastoral Council read this section 3, to say, how are we going to implement this in our diocese, and immediately called for a series of diocesan assemblies. So we will have our next diocesan assembly in September 26. And I can see around the country that they're starting to spring up in the UK. We just haven't had many of them. I know across Europe, some dioceses are on their kind of 5th diocesan synod. They have been holding them every 5 years for 25 years. They're really good at them. We are in the UK really the babies at this. We don't quite know what we're doing, but again, a great paragraph. What are we going to do? What will we do when we gather everybody? Okay, so the bishop is going to give an account of pastoral activity. We can talk about the implementation of a diocesan pastoral plan. We can talk about the reception of synodal processes, initiatives in safeguarding, etc., etc. So it gives you a good kind of template, or a starting point at least, for what would we do if we were to gather, because we're just not used to this. But then it also says we need to have another look at the canonical provisions. And one of the things that's happening at the moment is that there's a bunch of study groups who've been meeting, in addition to a canonical commission, who are also recommending changes to canon law as proposed in this document. So that's coming in December. So I just want to wrap up by sharing the next steps. This came out in the document, the Pathways for Implementation, which came out in June, which you'll find on the Synod website, and which gives a clear pathway. It says, okay, right now, the task at hand is to receive and implement the final document in local communities. Then we're moving to these assemblies, January to June 27. My bishop was very pleased that he'd got in early, so we're doing ours in September 26. Then national and episcopal conferences assemblies in the second half of 27, continental assemblies 28, leading to this ecclesial assembly in October 28. That is ambitious, I would say. Having been the person who ends up getting tasked with organising some of this stuff, I'm slightly kind of got my hair standing on end just even thinking about the organisation of that. But the very interesting and important thing about this is it is an ecclesial assembly, not a synod, in 2028. So the synod on synodality was the gathering of bishops with additional voting members. As we all know, 50 women, about 75 lay people in total. This is an ecclesial assembly. This is the gathering of the people of God, which again is a shift from what we've had. So sorry for the kind of canter through the document, and I normally put lots more images in my slides, so you've had lots of text this evening, but hopefully that's given you a flavour of the kind of understanding within synodality, within this document, of how the decision making works and where it's coming from. I'm giving you another QR code. The comms person is going to be much happier. This, if you want to see this being reflected, I mean, some of you will be sitting there thinking, Avril, that's all very nice. That is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And it's certainly not happening anywhere near me. We recently did a series of webinars, our online book club, where we went through chapter by chapter with special guests from around the world. And the part 3, which looked at this chapter on the conversion of our processes, was with the most amazing speaker, Dr. Estella Padilla, who's a theologian and community organizer. And if you want to know where your church is, if you have a heart for the marginalized, and how are we really including everybody in our decision making, watch that episode, because she just blows my mind with this image of the Filipino church, so oriented to mission, so oriented to social action. She's just fantastic. So I thoroughly recommend that to you. And then on our website, you'll also find a pastoral council toolkit. So if you're thinking, actually, our pastoral council has been dead and buried for 20 years and we need a new one, or perhaps that it's just a bit staid. It's just not really going anywhere. It's kind of got a bit obsessed with the car parking and the Christmas fair, and it's lost its sense of mission. Have a look at that, because it imagines the pastoral councils in a new way. And then finally, just to give you the heads up that we've got an online gathering on the 18th of October to talk further about the practical next steps for implementing the synod. And we've got a fabulous interview with Bishop Brendan Leahy from the Diocese of Limerick, talking about what he's doing in his diocese. Valerie, I'm going to stop talking because I will be talking all night. You know how passionate I get about all of this, but I hope that was helpful. And it's just to give you a little taste. And I'm very happy to take questions later.
Thank you very much, Avril. That certainly was a high-speed, condensed version of the final document, but you picked out all the key points that are in there, and it is a rich document, but it really gives us a lot to focus on as well. I'm going to move ahead because I don't want us to miss away from our timetable, so I'll call now on Elsa Ferrario, please, to introduce our next speaker. Elsa.
Thank you, Cole. I'm so happy and honored to introduce Dr. Martin Schockenhoff, a member of We Are Church Germany and a valued member of the international coordinating team of We Are Church International. Martin is a distinguished lawyer at one of Germany's largest law firms. Married to Martina, also a member of We Are Church Germany, they have 3 children. He studied theology through distance learning a few years ago. In his parish of Ludwigsburg-Neckar-Wahingen, he is the world leader. Since his student days, he has been actively involved in concrete development aid and fair trade projects. He is the spokesperson of the management team of the Pro Concilio Association. What is the Pro Concilio? Is a church reform group in the Diocese of Rothenburg-Stuttgart, and it sees that the Catholic Church is in a crucial phase in which it needs to be updated. Last month, as a spokesperson for We Are Church International, Martin was in Indonesia, speaking at the Asian Lay Leaders Forum, an important initiative for young, from 20 to 30-year-old Catholics in Southeast Asia. As a guest speaker, Martin reported on the current status of the World Synod and its continuation, confirmed by Pope Leo XIV, including the tasks and challenges for bishops and Christians in the individual dioceses. Martin completely won over the young people at the Asian Lay Leaders Forum with his warm humanity, his gentle charm, and our equality t-shirt, which seemed tailor-made for the young people at the forum. Equality for all is our motto, but all also stands for Asian lay leaders. So thank you, Martin, for being a great ambassador for We Are Church in Indonesia, and thank you for the interesting things you will tell us in your speech, which is about electing bishops. It's up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Too much praise from me. There are many people here on the conference who have much more merit. Anyway, thank you very much, Elsa, for this benevolent introduction. And let's go now straight to our subject matter. Electing bishops. As you will know, one of the demands of We Are Church is lay participation in the election of bishops. In reality, we are quite far from that. And the reality is, we will see what the reality is if we look at the current Codex, CIC, Codex Juris Canonici. Valerie, the next slide, please. So, Canon 377 says, the Supreme Pontiff, which is the Pope, freely appoints bishops or confirms those legitimately elected. So, according to this provision, there are two possibilities. Either the Pope himself appoints a bishop, or he confirms a bishop who is legitimately elected. But what does legitimately elected mean? Are lay people allowed to vote in the election of bishops? So the answer from Rome is no, they are not allowed to elect and to participate in the election or appointment of bishops. So this has not always been the case. Bishops have been appointed for almost 2,000 years now, but the current codex came into force only in 1983. So the question is, and let's take a look at how things used to be before. But before we start with the procedure of the election of bishops, we should have a short look at what qualities a bishop should have. Valerie, next slide, please. Here we can see what the Bible says, the book of Timothy. The bishop is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, not given to drunkenness, not quarrelsome, manages its own family well, and sees that his children obey him. I think that this is still a quite good description of the requirements for a bishop. Perhaps some secondary qualities are to be added. The bishop should be able to write emails, not be afraid of women in leadership positions, and watch a Netflix movie every now and then to keep in touch what is going on in society. We have another very good description of the requirements for a bishop by the current Pope Leo. Next slide, please. The poor must be able to see him, the bishop, as a father and brother and not feel uncomfortable when they meet him or enter his house. You can see that Pope Leo is a very insightful person with regard to the qualities of a bishop and to human nature. Office, status, and luxury create distance to people who are not so rich or do not have the same status. But the bishop should live in such a way that distance cannot arise. So, but now to our first question. Who actually elected the bishop in the past? We will look at the next slide, please. So in the 1st and 2nd century, the bishop was elected by the members of the parish. There is Hippolytus of Rome, who was born in the 2nd century, who reported on a church order pursuant to which the bishop was elected by all people, which means the members of the parish. As late as the 5th century, Pope Leo the Great said, whoever is to preside over all must also be elected by all. At that time, however, this was only wishful thinking. From the 3rd century onwards, bishops were elected by the neighboring bishops, not by the parish members. However, it was dependent on the subsequent consent of the parish members. So the parish members were still involved, but they could not anymore elect the bishop. They could only consent to the election which was made by the neighboring bishops. In the Middle Ages, then, the right of confirmation of the congregations was also abolished, and the right to elect the bishop was transferred to the cathedral chapter, which means that the laity was totally excluded. Today, as already mentioned, the appointment of bishops is laid down in section 377 of the CIC. Next slide, please. Here we see again this provision in the Codex. In many parts of the world, the bishop is actually appointed directly by the Pope. However, there are some countries in which the second alternative is used. The Pope confirms those legitimately elected. One example of this are some federal states in Germany. The Vatican has concluded a concordat, which is an international treaty, with these states, which regulates the election of bishops as follows. Next slide, please. Here we see the concordat with the federal state of Baden, which is in southwestern Germany. And concordats, the Vatican agrees with other states. They prevail. They precede, they prevail, and they are more important than all other provisions of the CIC. So the content of the concordat, it is what counts. What does the concordat say? The concordat says that the chapter sends a list of suitable candidates to the Vatican. Considering this list, step 2, however not being bound to it, the Vatican nominates 3 candidates, at least one of whom must come from the diocese. And then he sends back the shortlist to the chapter, and the chapter then, step 3, elects the bishop from these 3 candidates by secret ballot. As in many other countries, there have long been calls in Germany to involve lay people in the election of bishops. And then in 2023, the Synodal path, he took up this point and he passed a resolution which was approved, by all bishops present. Next slide, please. As you will know, the Synodal path, it consisted of all German bishops, 27 dioceses, and an equal number of lay representatives. And the resolution was made with the consent of all bishops present in this session of the Synodal path. And the Synodal path decided that the list of candidates to be submitted to the Vatican by the chapter is to be drawn up jointly by the members of the chapter and an equal number of lay people. So first point where lay people are involved. Then the second step, the chapter presents the list of 3 candidates nominated by the Vatican, the short list, which comes back from the Vatican, to the lay representatives. And the lay representatives may make an election recommendation to the chapter. Second point, where lay representatives are to be involved. And then the third step, the chapter then elects the bishop from the list of 3 by secret ballot. This is the same as in the concordat. So the lay people will not participate in the election, but they will see the list of 3 and they are allowed to make a recommendation to the chapter. Next slide, please. So what did the Vatican say when in 2024 in 3 German dioceses a new bishop had to be elected? The Vatican said, this decision of the Synodal path is null and void. First, the participation of lay people in the election of bishops is aimed at breaking the concordat. And second, the participation of lay people in the election of bishops violates the papal secrecy. So, what is to be made of this? Next slide, please. So there is no breach of the concordat as the Concordat does not prohibit lay participation. Canon lawyers in Germany and even our diocese lawyer take the same view. The Concordat does not prohibit lay participation, so the first objection of the Vatican is not justified. The second objection, the alleged breach of the papal secrecy, is assertedly based on a decree by Pope Paul VI in the 1970s. So papal secrecy is not a dogma, it is not a rule of faith, but it is simply an administrative regulation. And this regulation says that all lay people who participate in the election of bishops are subject to the papal secrecy in the same way as the members of the chapter. So the papal secrecy is therefore preserved. Therefore, the Vatican's objections were unjustified. But what did the cathedral chapters do? Although the objections were not justified, they gave in. They flinched. So the lay people were only allowed to submit proposals to the chapter, but they were not otherwise involved. Next slide, please. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is the synodal path wanted to involve lay people cautiously in the election of bishops, in accordance with current canon law and with the approval of the bishops participating in the synodal path. But when the resolution was actually to be implemented, ill-founded threats from Rome were enough to ignore the resolution of the synodal path and to exclude the laity. So, it's great to talk about reforms, but it takes courage to implement them. And apparently, obviously, the chapters did lack this courage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. That's a fascinating insight into the possibilities for electing bishops in our church. Like you, I'm sure I'm very disappointed that they gave in, even though they had right on their side. We must press on. We will have time for questions later on. I'd now like to call on Martha Heitzer to introduce our third speaker. Martha, over to you, please.
I'm very fond of introducing Harald, who is a good friend and a good important member of our church in Austria. He was born in Linz in Upper Austria, and he spent his childhood already in the parish where he works now as a parish leader. And he said he enthusiastically became an altar boy, and later was also involved in youth work in that parish. After graduating from high school, he studied theology in Linz and in Paris, and later psychology and philosophy in Vienna. He appreciated Linz for its open and critical theology, and Paris allowed him to look beyond the horizon of the Upper Austrian Church. And he spent his community service in a small Romanian village, to which he still feels very connected even today. He is now leader of 2 parishes in Upper Austria. This one, his own parish, his old parish, St. Lawrence, where we will celebrate our 30 years jubilee in October, and a neighborhood parish. For that, he had to cancel his work at the University of Education in the Diocese of Linz because of the workload, of course. He is married to Uli, and he has 2 fabulous children, as we know, Marlies and Adrian. And in 2017, he agreed to be our We Are Church speaker for Upper Austria. And since that time, he does a lot of work for our We Are Church board and for our community Kirchenreform, the conclusion of the reform groups in Austria. He is also an important worker for our newspaper, full of ideas and helpful suggestions. Thank you, Harald, for all your important work and for telling us about it today.
Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the introduction. And hello to everyone. I would like to follow on from Avril Baigent and Martin Schockenhoff. Their topics were decision-taking in a synodal church on the one hand, and electing bishops on the other hand. Well, my topic is lay leadership. But we are not far away from the two previous topics. Why? Because in our parish, we have a democratically elected parish council, and this council voted for me to lead the parish. So we have a decision taken in a synodal church on the one hand, and we have an elected parish leader on the other hand. How did it all begin? In 2010, my home parish was abandoned by its priest who went away. Neither a diocesan priest nor two monasteries in the immediate neighborhood wanted to take over the parish. So it came about that I was asked. For this reason, I gave up my professional goals, which were mainly in schools and universities, and became the head of this parish. I did this for only one reason, because of my love to our church. However, canon law does not provide for a lay person to lead a parish. Canon 517 requires that in such a case, in addition to the lay person, a priest has to be appointed to officially lead the pastoral care and take over the priestly duties. But there was no priest who came forward and said, I want to do this. Therefore, the highest ranking priest in our region took on this task. He signed the paper, but made it clear from the beginning that he would do absolutely nothing. He held this position on paper for my first year. During the whole year, the people who came to church on Sunday saw him twice. Once at the beginning of the year, at the welcome service, and once at the end of the year at the farewell service. That's all. But there was another priest, a young one, who was willing to come to us every 2 weeks on a voluntary basis. But after a year, the diocese took this young priest away from us because they needed him elsewhere. And from then on, the priest of our neighboring parish was responsible for us. Later, another priest, once more later, another priest, and once more later, another priest. In total, I have had 5 such priests in the 15 years so far. but none of these 5 has led the parish in any way. In these 15 years, we had a few hundred meetings in our parish, but there has not been a single meeting in which one of these priests has participated. The respective priest was always invited, but none ever came. And why? Because each of these priests knew that this parish could manage well without him. And so we made all the decisions in these 15 years without a priest. These included major decisions about liturgy and church policy, decisions about construction projects, and about a lot of money. And looking back, I can say everything went well. The priest was never missed. The priest was never missed. You definitely don't need a priest to run a parish. At least that's true from an organizational point of view. What is very important for the parish leadership and for me personally is communication within the parish. This includes especially information. When I became parish leader, I immediately introduced a newsletter that I sent to an inner circle of the parish. 150 people, most of them parish volunteers, receive this newsletter by email approximately every 2 months, while older people who do not have a computer receive it by the postman. In this newsletter, I provide more detailed and, above all, more personal information than in the parish magazine. And many people are grateful for this. I have also started to put up a weekly notice in the church, which not only contains the weekly program, but also always includes a current tip of the week. This also provides information. Anyone who wants to can take this notice and find out something about the parish in this way. But information in the church must not be a one-way street. That's why I meet with the parish council leadership every few months to exchange ideas. In these meetings, there is no agenda, just listening. The question is always the same. The question is always, what are we hearing in our parish? What are we noticing? And I am allowed to listen and at the end to discuss. For me, these are particularly valuable meetings. In summary, you don't need an ordained priest to lead a parish. Instead, you need someone who has earned the trust of the people to lead them and who also knows how to lead. It's also a question of know-how. Above all, you need someone who understands synodality. That person can be a lay person or a priest, a man or a woman. It doesn't really matter. To be a Christian would be fine. But now let's rub salt in the wound. Let us ask if it is really possible to run a parish without a priest. Canon law is of least interest to me in this respect, because it cannot be the decisive norm. I think the law has to follow theology. not the other way around. But theology, dogmatics, liturgy, what about that? How do we in my parish handle church services? Well, in the beginning, we had a Eucharistic celebration with a priest every 2 Sundays. On the Sundays in between, my pastoral assistant and I held a service with communion. We put a lot of effort into it and were very delighted to see that people really appreciated this form of celebration. Well, there have also been a few people, not many, only a few, who missed the classic form of the Eucharistic celebration with the Eucharistic prayer and the consecration. But more or less everyone was happy that we were at least able to celebrate Mass together. And that there was communion. For the large majority of the parish, that worked well. But then the diocese took this young priest away from us, and other changes followed. Finally, there was the coronavirus pandemic, and exactly at this time we had a priest who was not only personally overwhelmed, but who also became very seriously ill. Neither his monastery nor the diocese asked how we were coping with this. We were left to our own devices. And so a very interesting period of great independence began. Once a month, this old priest came to a weekday service and celebrated the Eucharist in the chapel with a few people. He consecrated the hosts for the whole month. For him, an old sick man, this was a service to the parish community that he was still able to perform well. The parish community itself, however, celebrated Sunday services week after week, Sunday for Sunday, and of course, distributed communion in accordance with Jesus' wish, do this in memory of me. I confess, we also can view this critically. The question arises, was it really necessary to have the hosts consecrated by this old priest once a month and then take this bread out of the tabernacle during the service? Couldn't we have consecrated the bread or the hosts ourselves together during the service, simply as a community of Christians gathered in faith? I think we could have done that. Jesus Christ would have been just as present. It's not him who we would have lost, but we would have lost our communion with the church. The church leadership would have excommunicated us, I'm sure, because they refuse to accept that Jesus Christ can come to us even without a priest. But we want to remain in communion with the church. Our path was a compromise in the interest of church unity. Final question. Would it be really possible without priests? Is there really no need for priests in a parish? I strongly advise answering this question not only on the basis of what we are accustomed to, because habits can also be wrong. I recommend really thinking through this question theologically and having the courage to break with traditional images of the Church. Hans Küng, Walter Kirchschläger, and others have shown how this can be done. But even Pope Benedict allowed himself to make a reference to this in his last publication, in the foreword to Cardinal Sarah's highly problematic book, De profondeur de nos cœurs. Pope Benedict wrote there about the lay character of the early Jesus movement. The lay character of the early Jesus movement. That should actually put the Church on the right track. In conclusion, however, I do not recommend a book by Pope Benedict, but a book by the German theologian Martin Ebner. Does the Catholic Church need priests? Ebner is a Catholic priest himself, but his answer from the New Testament, from the message of Jesus, is very, very clear. A church community does not need a priest. It needs leadership, it needs trust, it needs community, it needs church services and many other things. But it does not need a priest. Lay leadership is possible, and lay leadership can be good. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Harald. That was a very challenging and very, very interesting presentation, particularly relevant for us here in Ireland, where the number of priests is going down, and we were facing exactly the situation that you faced 15 years ago in Austria.
I just wanted to take a few minutes and acknowledge everyone here today, but especially our three speakers, Avril, Martin, and Harald, and the amazing hope and positive energy and passion they brought us as they talked about their experience on synodality, the whole issue of decision-making, decision-taking, the issue of lay involvement in the election of bishops, as well as the issue of lay leadership of a parish community. It gives me great hope and also some sadness to realize that we come again to the barriers where things happen. You know, each of us have 86,400 seconds in every day. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to take a few of them today to say thank you. And it's been a rich experience for me as an American to see and hear what's going on at the grassroots across Europe. It gives me hope. And I think we are the future.
So the closing prayer. Bless to us, O Lord, the doors we open, the thresholds we cross, the roads that lie before us. Go with us as we go, sharing the journey. Amen.